If one subset of a people, those directing our attention, crafting the narrative, if one subset of a people changes definitions, exchanges meanings of words to suit their purpose, they undermine the shared psyche of language. And these changes in definitions as an attempt to deny reality are not found only in demographic factors. When it was not politically advantageous to acknowledge the country was in a recession, the politicians redefined the word. Granted, by law, it was their right to define it, but taking away the traditional, commonly understood and taught definition in favor of a congressional declaration cannot be seen as anything but an attack on its definition. If men can have babies, then men should no longer be left out of the abortion debate, even though the feminists have always argued only women should have a say. Even the word baby has connotations. So for emotional reasons, exchange baby for fetus, even though fetus is Latin for baby. Call a terrorist attack a man-made disaster while labeling as terrorists parents who show up at a school board meeting to call out their elected school board members. And then at the same time, ignoring those who threaten or actually use violence in order to protest or initiate a change in policy, marching at night to officials' homes, disturbing the peace, or threatening U.S. Supreme Court justices. Whereas an insurrection once meant an armed resistance against the power of the state, a rebellion or a revolt, it now includes parading, trespassing, and peaceful protest without arms. Comparing January 6th to Bastille Day is just crazy to the objective observer. If those people were plotting a hostile takeover of the country, they would have been more successful. I've seen the pictures. If that many people had been armed and ready to revolt and use violence, yes, there would have been a high number of casualties inside the Capitol building, including deaths of elected representatives. But that's not what happened. If the new Black Panthers in 2008, who were intimidating voters on Election Day by physically blocking the entrance to a polling place, was not voter suppression, but watching ballot drop boxes and requiring voter ID in 2022 is, definitions have definitely changed. To suppress means to end or stop by force. This entire book could be filled with obvious examples of changing definitions and changing words to shift a narrative, with explanations that would have been unnecessary 20 years ago. Illegal alien is a good one because words not only have definitions but connotations. By changing the words, we change the understanding that comes along with the concept, the emotion associated with the word or term. Neither undocumented worker nor migrant worker evokes the same visceral emotion as illegal or alien. There is a reason Michelle Obama argued, quote, "We are going to have to change our conversation. We are going to have to change our traditions, our history," end quote. How one shapes the conversation impacts the prevailing narrative. Exchanging equality for equity and redefining both to make each analogous to fair outcomes, redefining diversity to mean the polar opposite, equating what we once thought of as segregation to mean inclusion, like having POC-only meetings or classes or clubs or POC-only Christmas parties. Okay, I'm going to take a break here and shamelessly plug my other original political philosophy. I'll put the Amazon link in the description too, but I wrote the much shorter missive called Black and White, an essay on critical theory, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. I wrote it concurrently with the Unraveling. If you want a perspective on these concepts like CRT or just critical theory in general, equity, diversity, inclusion, and all that, if you want a perspective on these concepts that you won't hear anywhere else out there, not on conservative media, not on legacy or mainstream media, I encourage you to grab that book too. Anyway, shifting a word like phobia, a word which once denoted fear and or indicated a psychological condition, to be used as a suffix in words like homophobia, Islamophobia, transphobia, to intentionally shift that word phobia, to use it in such a way that not only are we equating fear with hate, but automatically labeling as fear and hate any ideology that disagrees with the approved narrative, and imposing a mental illness condition upon anyone who has rationally based reservations and concerns about ideas or actually sees militant motives of a movement as a danger to society. Watering down words like racism, but using the inflammatory passions previously associated with the original meaning to manipulate thoughts about peoples and groups until the word has no meaning at all. Equating silence, literally doing or saying nothing. Equating silence with violence, intentionally acting, an intentional behavior of perpetrating an immoral act upon someone else that imposes on their inalienable rights of life and liberty, while in the same breath describing a riot as a mostly peaceful protest in a situation where an entire city neighborhood is burned to the ground, civilians are beaten and murdered, and the participants use the chaos to mask their looting. The right to peaceably assemble and the right to petition the government are both constitutionally protected civil liberties, but that assumes Americans know a peaceful protest when they see one. When we are told that a violent and destructive riot is a peaceful protest, what should be obvious is now obscene. Again, this not only chips away at the shared language pillar, but continually confuses all speakers of the language. We cannot keep up. Our foundations keep shifting and we are constantly off balance. This leads to insecurity and anxiety, which leads to isolation and confusion, even an altered consciousness, which opens us up to psychological manipulation. When we are constantly being told we did not see what we know we saw, when we are told that we actually saw the opposite, we are indeed living in George Orwell's 1984. Attempting to make nonsensical ideas mainstream by changing the language, using birthing person instead of mother, declaring that men get periods too, not only confuses the language, but it again rejects nature and the immutable laws therein, which we once called science and facts. We have redefined other seemingly innocuous words as well: choice, justice, vaccine, and tolerance. When we don't have agreed upon definitions, when we redefine words to mean the exact opposite of the previously agreed upon meaning, we do not and cannot have a shared language. When monogamous lesbianism no longer insinuates safe contraception and lesbians who refuse to date women with penises are considered bigots, the lack of shared understanding borders on insanity. So this redefinition is also an attack on shared values, the second pillar, because it makes truth relative. When we do not have a reliable measuring stick, we cannot measure anything. Truth within the understanding of natural law is absolute, not relative. So when we reject natural law, when each person is creating their own measuring stick, truth is no longer truth. We are exchanging truth for a lie, or really lots and lots of lies. When your truth is different from my truth, there is no truth. While we should all be in pursuit of truth, Americans instead are desperately trying to get their side's truth to win, so they can force those who disagree with them to live according to the winning side's rules. We again see the desperation brought on by equating democracy with freedom when the definition of democracy has not changed. The reality that natural law recognizes is simple. You and I may not agree about what the truth is, but there is only one truth. Natural law, in turn, then necessarily relies upon an agreed upon vocabulary. What I see as a bird, you also see as a bird, because it is obvious. Without truth informed by the obvious found within natural law, there is no basis or foundation for any values, let alone a set of shared ones, because there is no agreed upon definition of right and wrong. It is impossible. So this attack on vocabulary is not only an attack on the pillar of language, but also an attack against the second pillar of civilization, that of shared values, because we cannot have shared values without shared language.